Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Academy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, look at the articles relevant for the examination, and extract the important background information, as well as take a look at how to create answers if questions could be asked from these articles. Now, the topics that we are going to cover today encompass in total around 11 different articles, which ensures a comprehensive coverage of the newspaper. So, starting with the editorial section, where nudges from the court, silence from the commission is about the SIR, the electoral roll revision exercise being carried out by the Election Commission. Now, that has remained in news for a few days now and for the few weeks now. Now, there have been certain observations made by the Supreme Court, which again has been discussed previously in the CNA. So, that is where we will take a look at this and what the article talks about. So, this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, transforming early childhood care and education. So, what is this early childhood care and education, and how the new education policy is in a way restructuring the way how we approach the early childhood care education system in our country, the reform that the Anganwadis need to undergo. So, this can be relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper 3. Now, after that, the one topic which has been in news for the past couple of days is basically US imposing 25% tariff along with penalty charges on India. Now, we are going to discuss very briefly about how this is marking a new turn in our relations with the US, where the relations have been taking a turn to the downslide. So, that is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then the Nisar satellite, how it has marked or initiated a new phase in our space exploration, and also when it comes to the collaboration with institutes like NASA in terms of space science. So, relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, there was a ruling on July 23rd by the ICJ, International Court of Justice, regarding climate change and making the emitter countries or the countries with larger amount of emissions, making them accountable. Now, the article which you will find in the newspaper is in the form of a Q&A with environmental experts regarding what the ruling can lead to. However, for those who are unversed and those of us who are not aware about the ruling, we shall be talking about the ruling in itself and what are its implications. So, we shall be taking a comprehensive view beyond what is required or what is simply mentioned in the article, relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, why the world needs better green technologies, owing to the alternatives which are required as compared to the present day solar panels which are deployed across the world, relevant again for your GS paper 3. Now, some of the articles we are going to mention and discuss purely from the point of view of prelims. INS Himgiri has been commissioned. Now, what is this INS Himgiri? It is a stealth frigate. Now, it is a follow up, or it is in the same line as INS Udaygiri as well. So, that is something we are going to discuss. Now, station in Ladakh begins research to simulate life on Mars. What is the name of that station? That becomes relevant for your prelims. Now, a couple of articles which have appeared in the business page, that is, apparel exports to US may slow down owing to the tariffs imposed, and the tariff on Indian pharma supplies will strain US healthcare budget. So, it will impact US as well. So, these two articles, what we will do is we will combine it with the portion of the editorial section so that we are going to get an overall idea about the immediate impact that these tariff announcements will cause. Now, global power grid expansion fuels copper demand surge. Now, copper as a particular commodity has been in news owing to the supply chain bottlenecks and owing to the fact that the world is grappling with a shortage of supply. So, it will impact countries like China, India, US, the EU, and so on. So, with the help of this, we shall take a look into the utility of copper in various different sectors. And also, when it comes to India, where is it that you will find the copper supplies? That can be relevant for the prelims examination. Having said that, overall area of copper as an industry this year is relevant for the mains exam as well. And we have basically provided the document and the entire PDF regarding that in the Telegram group earlier as well. Now, having said that, before we carry out the discussion for all these topics, an important announcement for all of you, all of the interested candidates who are interested in clearing the examination in 2026 2027, we come ahead with a 3-day free trial for all of you, whereby for the next 3 days, you can watch all the various different basically products and programs for GS as well as optional, absolutely free of cost. So, all online courses and batches shall be available to you, including all the top educators and the coursewares and the course programs that they have basically launched. Now, this will be an exposure to a very structured form of education, or so to say, a structured form of lectures, coverage of the syllabus, and overall a comprehensive idea of the approach required in order to gain expertise in the reach and in the preparation of civil services. Having said that, we come to the first article of the day and we start the discussion with the first article, that is Nudges from the Court, Silence from the Commission. Now, this article, in its entire tone and its entire connotation, basically talks about the requirement of why the public in general should feel agitated with the recent election commission move to carry out the revision of electoral rolls. Now, the revision of electoral rolls, which has been launched in the state of Bihar prior to the Bihar state elections, which are supposed to be held later this year. Now, that has run into large amount of controversy, where various different political parties, they are alleging a kind of a systematic delineation, so to say, or a systematic alienation of many of the voters. Now, this revision of electoral rolls, now, why is it carried out? And why is it carried out now? This is a question that Supreme Court has also asked the Election Commission. The Election Commission has not been very forthcoming in the solutions and the answers that it has provided. And in a way, it has led to the disenfranchisement of lakhs of eligible voters or the earlier voters who were basically enumerated in the voter list in the Bihar elections. So, for those of us who don't have a background about it, a kind of a timeline based background for all of you so that you are well versed with what the situation at hand is. So, the Election Commission has launched the Special Intensive Revision or SIR, which is in a way the revision of the electoral rolls. What do we mean by electoral rolls? The names of all those voters who are eligible to vote in any particular election in that constituency. Now, this revision is carried out in various different time intervals in different parts of the world. And even in our country, we have periodically carried out the revision of the electoral rolls. Now, this electoral roll revision is of two types. One is the Special Summary Revision or SSR, and another is the Special Intensive Revision or SIR. Now, SIR is much more detailed and more, in a way, encompassing in terms of the voters and verification of the voter list. Now, this SIR, which has been carried out, is being carried out keeping in mind the legislative elections which are slated to be held in the later part of this year in the state of Bihar. Now, whenever you carry out the intensive revision of the electoral rolls, it is a tedious exercise and it is a very cumbersome exercise which involves verification of the identification proofs, the residency proofs, the proof of the birth, etc., in that particular constituency. As a consequence of that, many of the voters, they find themselves disenfranchised in a way, or what that means is that earlier they found their names in the voter list, but as per estimates, close to around 50 lakh voters, they find their names to be eliminated from the voter list. So in a way, that in itself means putting certain amount of population away from the electoral exercise. Now, this raises certain very immediate questions, that why this revision is being carried out in the first place. So, the answer to that is that periodic revision of the electoral rolls is a necessity to maintain what is referred to as the basic requirement of an electoral democracy. For example, what do we mean by that? Suppose in any particular constituency, there are 1 lakh voters who are eligible to vote today, that is 2025. Now, 10 years down the line, many of those voters would have died, few of the voters would have migrated, few of the new voters would have attained the age of 18 years and would now be eligible to vote. So, there is a consistent change in the voting group. As a consequence, unless and until you carry out periodic revision of the voting rolls or the electoral rolls, the entire electoral exercise, that means it is not absolutely perfect. So that is why the verification of electoral rolls need to be carried out periodically. That is the answer to why it is done. Now, in the state of Bihar, the last time the revision of electoral rolls was done was way back in 2003. So you can imagine a time span of 22 years has passed since the last revision of electoral rolls. Bihar being an out migrant state, that is, the state from where large amount of population they migrate to different states in order to find work, in order to find livelihood, etc. That means at any particular point of time, you will have millions of people or lakhs of people who end up moving out of the state. So they don't vote or they don't exercise their voting rights during the election process. As a consequence, you do need this revision. But then, if that is the logic behind revision, then why is there such a hue and cry and why is there such an opposition to this revision exercise being carried out by the Election Commission? The answer is simple. Understand that the revision process will basically mean that if I am a voter in the state of Bihar, I will have to furnish documents. I will have to furnish the proof of residence, the proof of birth, etc. All of them have to be supplied to the block level officers and so on. Now, in a state which is marked by, or which is significantly marked by poverty, illiteracy, and a large amount of vulnerable population when it comes to women, the backward classes, as well as the case of older population, many of that population does not have its documentation in perfect order. As a consequence, many of them have not been able to produce the relevant documents in the time window that the Election Commission has stipulated. So, in general, whenever this revision is carried out, it is a time taking process because it would involve tens of lakhs of voter population. Now, the process which is being carried out right now, that the allegation is that it is being carried out in a very hastened manner, in a very quick fix manner, and there is not enough time window provided to the citizens of the particular state to furnish their document. Many of that the population who is living in various different states, now they won't have enough time to go back to that their particular home district and furnish those documents. They won't get the leaves, they won't be able to travel, and so on. As a consequence of that, automatically those voters will be disenfranchised. So it is seen largely as an exclusionary exercise carried out in a haste manner or a hastened manner. So voters have been asked to prove their residency in order to be eligible to vote. Lakhs of potential voters are on the verge of losing their right to vote, and the matter had been taken to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court asked the Election Commission certain very pointed questions, that why are you not accepting certain simple proofs of residence such as Aadhaar and so on. Now, it is true that in multiple districts, the documents such as Aadhaar, they are accepted as a proof of residence, as a proof of birth, etc. But in certain districts, it has been found that the block level officers, they are not accepting that as a proof of residence. They are asking for domicile certificates and so on. And many of the voters, as I already emphasized, now see, those voters who have all the documents in order, they will be able to furnish and they will find their names, and they have found their names in the new revised electoral roll as well. But what about those poor population and those illiterate population, which is a substantial chunk in a state like Bihar, who don't have these documents? So that is why the Supreme Court has taken up this issue and has asked Election Commission certain questions, and the Election Commission's answer has not been very forthcoming and has not been very clear. It is in that context that the article is basically crafted. Now, the article talks about the fact that look, this shift which has happened, what shift? So, the shift in terms of what is required to be a voter in a particular constituency immediately post independence. Now, think about it for a brief moment. When India gained independence, our life expectancy was very, very low. Our literacy rate was even lower. Now, at that point of time, to carry out elections at a national scale, that was tremendously challenging. Now, think about it, even at that nascent stage, the post independent modern India took a step which was, in a way, example to the rest of the world. We did not create any kind of precondition that what is required to be eligible to be a voter in India. The election commission, in a way, they created and they in a way became very, very innovative in order to ensure that there is maximum participation, voter participation. How do they do that? So they allowed for the stamping on, and they provided the electoral symbols which could be easily identified. So even if you, as an individual, as a voter, were not able to read the name of the particular candidate or the name of the political party, did not mean that you are disenfranchised. You had the electoral symbols which appeared in large shapes and large sizes in the entire process, and you were simply asked to stamp on the political party that you wanted to vote for. Now, in a way, that was considered to be an inclusive exercise to bring every part of the population and make them a part of the electoral democracy that India was supposed to become. Now, fast forward that to today. So earlier, the situation was that it was the responsibility of the state, responsibility of the country to ensure that everybody participates in the voting exercise. And today, the SIR, which is being carried out in a fast paced process in Bihar, now what has that led to is a fact that now the responsibility that whether you are a voter or not, that has shifted from the state the voter. Earlier, state was responsible to ensure that you are a voter. Now, you are responsible to show the proof to the state that yes, I am the eligible voter, and the state is eliminating few of them. So that is what the article alleges, that the shift is from inclusion to that of an exclusion. Now, the current move demands documents for voter verification, which disproportionately affects the marginalized communities like the poor, illiterate, and the migrant. And many of the people have even been tagged as doubtful voters and without due legal recourse. Because if, let's suppose, a common individual on the ground, now they are listed as doubtful voter because they don't have sufficient or a verifiable document proof. What will happen as a consequence of that? Now, they cannot challenge this ruling or this order by the election commission into the courts. They don't have that much amount of money or wherewithal to challenge these rulings. So, automatically, most of them will basically stay silent and they will be disenfranchised. Now, why is it that these doubtful voters or this verification of the address proof, etc., why has that gained a lot of momentum, particularly in the eastern part of the country? So you have to understand the root cause of the problem as well. In many of the states, for example, when you consider the states like Tripura, when you consider the states like Assam, when you consider the states like even Jharkhand, West Bengal, Bihar. Now, these are the eastern states where there has been consistent allegations for the past couple of decades and more. If you actually visit the ground areas and the districts, there is a consistent allegation by many of the voters that you have migrants, particularly the illegal migrants coming from the country of Bangladesh, who are basically getting the Aadhaar rolls created due to the connections that they have. And in a way, they are dominating the electoral outcome. At least that has been the political narrative in the states of Tripura, Assam, and West Bengal, and even Bihar. In Bihar, in particular, the northeastern regions around the districts, particularly Farbisganj, Araria, Kishanganj, all these areas, they have been impacted by these kind of electoral allegations. So, as a consequence, there was an overwhelming pressure building up on the election commission that before the next elections, you ensure that those illegal immigrants, they are not a part of the electoral process. That is why this hastened move from the side of the election commission. Having said that, you see, whenever you have this documentation which needs to be furnished and you need to provide evidence that, yes, I have been living in the state. Now, this is in a way submitting your entire citizenship status to the bureaucratic paperwork verification process in a way. Now, whether you are a citizen of that state or not, and in the larger context, if you are not a citizen of that state where you are living, are you a citizen of the country or not? Now, all that question, and a very important question for that matter, that is purely on the wherewithal and the whims and the fantasies of the officer that you are dealing with. The officer can be, in a way, biased, the officer can be corrupt, and that can lead to a lot of discrepancies arising. Now, the article basically alleges that, look, this defines the citizenship question and it mentions the NRC exercise, right? The National Register of Citizens exercise, which was held in Assam. Now, as per this NRC exercise, which was held in Assam, now, during that, again, there was the requirement of the proof of residence, proof of birth to be furnished before the authorities. Now, it was carried out in a lengthy period of time, not like the short period of time with which the Bihar voters have got. But despite that lengthy process and ample amount of time given, large amount of population found their names not included in the NRC. And there were allegations that people belonging to minority groups, they were looked at with greater suspicion. And many of the minorities who had previously served in the Indian armed forces and held coveted position in the government, even they found their names excluded from the NRC. So the article alleges that this is a kind of a systematic pattern which is developing where the entire citizenship proof is shifted to a bureaucratic exercise, and as a consequence, the vulnerable, the minorities, slowly and steadily, they are being pushed out of the citizenship mandate. So that is where the citizenship question and shifting of the burden, shift of burden of proof, the citizens is problematic, right? Now, and along with that, the bureaucratic process. Bureaucratic process means you are at the basically wherewithal and the capability of the officer in charge. Bureaucratic process can lead to disenfranchisement. To disenfranchisement. Now you see, what does the article suggest as a way forward? Now the article suggests basically that what this calls for, or the article in a way suggests that this is a kind of an undeclared emergency which has been imposed in the country. And Bihar is just one of those states. And it argues that even in the case of emergency, the state gets overwhelming power. And even in this situation, it can be argued that yes, the state has got greater amount of power to decide who is the voter or not. As a way forward, the article argues that the citizen should carry out andolan or a movement of mass protest on the ground. Now, while that is not always the favorable solution, you see, we have to understand and cut the clutter around this entire debate. Is the revision of electoral rules needed? Absolutely, yes. Is the revision of electoral rules a part of a healthy electoral democracy? The answer is yes. But the problem is what it has to be called out for. The problem is that it is being carried out in a very hastened manner. If indeed that revision of electoral rules were to be carried out, or is if it is to be carried out in any state, then you need to provide the people ample amount of time. It cannot be like a sudden mock test, which is announced in the preceding week that next week we are going to take a test. So, that is a particular sentence which the article also mentions that being a voter is not an exam or an entrance exam that the voter should be subjected to. It is their right. And that right cannot be put a such a stringent time frame to. So that is why the way forward is that revision, periodic revision, is it to be carried out? It should be carried out. Periodic revision should be carried out, right? Is needed. Why is it needed? We have discussed about it that many people out migrate, many people immigrate, many people die, many people come of age. So there is a requirement of periodic revision. But then due time needs to be provided. Needs to be provided. Okay. And then when the time is provided, is that sufficient? No. Because you see, when we talk about the population who votes, you have illiterate, you have vulnerable. Many of them are not so abreast with the news developments which keep on happening. So there is a requirement of mass awareness campaign. How do you launch these mass awareness campaigns? How do you create such a kind of a buzz that everybody wants to get themselves enrolled and get themselves enfranchised again? So, in a way, that requires multi stakeholder meeting and a consensus with the political parties, the civil society organizations, and a due process of diligence whereby the problems on the ground that might not be understood by the Election Commission of India, but the problems, the real logistical issues on the ground, that will be better understood by the people on the ground, the pressure groups that are there, the civil society organizations. So that is where the stakeholders need to be consulted and then awareness campaigns need to be launched. So that is where the way forward, multi stakeholder consultation is required, stakeholder consultation, and then after that, you also need mass awareness, right? Now, when it comes to the case of the Supreme Court and the Election Commission of India, now there is a high probability that the Election Commission of India will go ahead with the deadline that it has announced. But in the state of Bihar, that means that few lakhs or lakhs of people, they will not be allowed to vote this time. They will not find their names in the electoral list. But then going ahead into the future, the sanitation or the sanitization of the electoral list, the verification of the names in the electoral rolls, that is a growing point of concern. There have been allegations like this in the preceding elections in the state of Maharashtra, even in the case of the national election which was held last year, where you had both the party in power as well as the opposition parties alleging that their particular voters were eliminated from the electoral rolls. So, electoral rolls and a trust in the electoral rolls and overall a trust in the electoral process is a must for the healthy functioning of an electoral democracy. An election commission should do everything which is possible to ensure that the trust is not vitiated, the trust is not destroyed, and what is seen is also perceived. So that can be a way forward that you can quote well. Now, then coming on to the second article, transforming early childhood care and education. What is this early childhood care and education? So basically, when you have a young one, a tiny tot, so these young ones to the age of particularly 0 to 6 years, that is a formative year for, or the formative years, so to say, for the development of a child. Now, at this particular stage of development, you have 90% of the brain which develops, the cognitive memory, etc., that starts developing. So it is very important at this stage of development that an individual is provided with all the nutrition and also the perfect amount of initial areas of education. Now, earlier, what used to be the case is that even when you were growing up, you would relate to it. That if you would have studied in the government schools, it would start from class 1, class 2, class 3, and so on. But any of you who has read in, let's suppose, a private school for that matter, they would have gone through nursery, then prep, then maybe a kindergarten stage, and then comes class 1, class 2, class 3, and so on. So the private schools historically have targeted the early childhood, whereas when we talk about the government led education system, it is largely eliminating these early childhood care education system. As per the various different government programs and the government schemes which were initially launched and launched earlier, all this burden of early childhood care and education, or ECCE, was restricted to the Anganwadis. You had close to around 14 lakh Anganwadis, right? Around 14 lakhs of them who were responsible for taking care of the nutritional needs of the children as well, as per the Poshan Abhiyan, right? Now, Poshan Abhiyan is ensuring that enough nutrition is provided so that the young ones, they don't suffer from stunting, malnutrition, undernutrition, and so on. Stunting and wasting is a prevalent problem in our country, and the Anganwadis, they have to ensure, and they are the ones responsible to even keep a track of whether immunization has been carried out in timely manner or not, and then to burden them with educational system as well. That meant the Anganwadis were so overburdened that they had little amount of leeway possible and available with them to ensure quality. Quantity was favored, quality was ignored. Now, the new education policy which has come up, it has marked a change, and a three-dimensional change in terms of the early childhood care and education. So, before coming into what are the changes that the new education policy has brought about and what are its implications and challenges, first of all, a very brief background about what do we mean by early childhood care and education, ECCE, as it is referred to. So, basically, it involves focusing upon health, nutrition, and the psychosocial care and development of the young one, preschool education and opportunities to play. You see, at the age of 0 to 3 or 3 to 6, you cannot expect a young one or a young child to start developing aptitude for algebra and calculus out there. But basically, at that point of time, you need the social abilities of the child, you need the cognitive abilities of the child to develop. So, that is where early child care does involve or does pay a large amount of attention into that play school idea, and care of even pregnant mother and parent counseling in terms of nutrition and how to carry out childcare. Now, why is it that it is so important? Because before the age of 5, 90% of the brain development happens. So, that is a game lost or won before the age of 5 years. On top of that, it leads to holistic development of the child, preparation for preschool education. You make the child strong enough mentally in a way to handle the challenges when it comes to the schooling time. Strong foundation is laid on which the child can then build upon confidently. And what is the part and the component of this holistic development? When we say that there is a holistic development of child, what do we mean by that? So it has again got five different components: physical and muscle development. That is why play at an early age is very important. Social and emotional development, whether they are able to understand the emotional quotient uh, amongst the fellow individuals or not. Cognitive development, language learning ability, and creative thinking development. Very important in order to gain and capitalize the human capital, so to say, that how that child will perform later on. Now, the NEP has brought transformative reforms in the ECCE sector, or early child care and education system. It aims to eliminate inequity by inequity means inequity is different from inequality, by the way. Inequality means difference in terms of availability or in terms of what you have and what I have. Inequity is lack of access, right? Many of the young ones, they don't have access to early child care and education. So this new education policy, with the help of the Bal Vatikas, now they have tried to address the inequity. In certain union territories like Daman and Diu and Dadra and basically the Dadra and Nagar Haveli, in those areas there have been perceptible changes and in a way progress which has been observed. So it aims to eliminate inequity by introducing preschool classes for 3 to 6 year olds in government schools. which had historically admitted students only from class 1. So there is a change where now even 3 to 6 year olds they are being addressed. So it has led to a change in the present setup. And three different changes have been mentioned in the article. Let us summarize and understand them. So, the structural shift. First of all, it has led to the expansion of the often ignored ECCE sector. Earlier, as we have discussed, all the burden for early childhood care and education was restricted to the Anganwadis. Anganwadis themselves has so much amount of load. Almost every government scheme has a role fixed for the Anganwadi workers. Now, Anganwadi workers, think about the youthful population that we have and a large amount of child population that we have. In that case, many of the times they were found to be lacking attention to the individual level. In a way, they were stagnated, saturated. Now, when this sector has been stressed upon, and many government schools are admitting this, admitting students and young ones from the age of 3 to 6 means what? Infrastructure needs to be developed, more educators need to be hired, right? Trained professionals and their training needs to be carried out. So an entire sector is opening up in front of our very own eyes. This will reduce the burden on the Anganwadis, and when the burden is reduced, the Anganwadis and the Anganwadi workers they can be much more efficient in the programs that they are carrying out. So it aims to universalize ECCE by 2030. Now, public ECC infrastructure had stagnated, and this will impact personnel management, that is, the individuals, the trainers, the skilled professionals, recruitment and training, and even financing and deployment of the skilled individuals. The second marked shift has been migration from the Anganwadi to schools. It has been found out with the help of various surveys that when a choice is given to the parents, that your tiny tot or your young one, the infant, now whether they can be visited by the Anganwadi workers at their home or they would go to the Anganwadi centers for early childhood care, or whether the parents would prefer the young ones to go to the school, almost maximum amount of parents they preferred the candidates or the children to go to school, because the perception is that the schools will ensure a holistic development. And that is where the parents are making this clear choice that if the government schools are offering them these services, we will send our children to the government schools and not to the Anganwadi centers anymore. So that is where a growing shift of 3 to 6 year olds from the Anganwadi centers to the school. In Dadra and Nagar Haveli and Daman and Diu, this is being observed. And that need basically provides the need to reorient the Anganwadi centers. You see, because they have a burden to ensure nutrition as well as education for 0 to 6 year old, obviously, both of them cannot be catered to. Either you have expertise in providing nutrition and you are so involved in doing that on a day to day basis, you have little amount of time available to ensure that these young ones they get some amount of quality education. So the Anganwadis also now have got reduced burden with which they can reprioritize what their functionalities are going. And one of the consequences of that is going to be that now the Anganwadis they can carry out more efficiently home visits targeting 0 to 3 year old, 0 to 3 year old. Now, at this particular stage, nutrition, role of immunization, etc., is a must. Now, once the burden is reduced, they can ensure that they do carry out the home visits and track the development of the young ones on a periodic basis. So, by transferring the 3 to 6 year olds to schools, Anganwadi centers can intensively support pregnant women, lactating mothers, and infant through targeted interventions and home, in a way, betterment of the child nutrition, child health, and even the case of maternal health. Mind you, as per the Sustainable Development Goal, it is not only a goal to reduce the infant mortality rate, but a significant goal is also to reduce the maternal mortality rate. So, this will, in a way, indirectly help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goal. Now, what is the challenge thereby? Every particular program has got a certain challenge. Till now, everything appears to be very clear, and rosy picture has been painted. But there is a challenge. And that challenge stems from the education system that we have. All of you who are a part of the education system, you would attest to the fact that and agree to the reality that in school, rote learning is something which is favored. And that is basically everyone ratifying the same particular fact and everyone vomiting the same particular fact in the examination. That is why these individuals, when they basically graduate out of the school and when they come out in the real world competition, they face an overwhelming competition, and many of them, they are not. So the challenge that we have is that it can happen that even the 3 to 6 year old students or children who are rather going to the schools now, there can be a systematic culture which can be developed, which can develop, where all of them are forced into the same rectification idea. So, based upon the same tests that they have to appear for, and that will lead to a capping of the development of child's cognitive memory. So, that is why the challenge is to find innovation. Find innovation in what? In imparting life lessons with the help of life lessons such as importance of teamwork, importance of perception, importance of observation rather than rectification, importance of exploration rather than being good at learning all the facts. So that is why that is one of the challenges. And what is the way forward in this? Way forward to carry out periodic surveys with the help of Pratham, etc., to carry out these surveys at the ground level to understand where the Anganwadi workers they are not able to perform the task and where the government intervention is needed, and also ensure participation of childcare NGOs in the process to find this innovative solution. Okay, now the practice question which can be framed from the topic: what is the role of early childhood care and education? Discuss the marked shift caused by NEP, that is the New Education Policy, in early childhood care and education, ECC. Now, basically, how do you approach this question and how do you write the answer to it? So, in the intro, what do you write? In the intro, you basically address the main question, that is, what is ECC? So, with the help of the infographics that we have basically discussed, you can talk about that ECC ensures the holistic development of the cognitive aspect, the language skills, the learning skills, as well as the nutritional development of a young one from the age of 0 to 6 years. So, that will be your brief introduction. That is the description of ECC, of early childhood care and education. Then, in the body portion, talk about the existing systems. What is the existing system? Because understand, in the question it is asked, explain the marked shift. How will you talk about the shift if you have not mentioned the previous situation? So, very briefly, the existing situation in a couple of sentences where the burden or the responsibility is restricted to the Anganwadi. Now, what you can also do with the help of your presentation skill, you can talk about the issues and use the bubble chart where issues faced in the existing system: stagnation, then lack of enough professionals, then lack of concentration on education, and a lack of home visits. All of that you can mention in the form of the bubble. So you will be able to reduce your word usage as well, and at the same time attract the attention of the evaluator. Then talk about the shift, and you have the three shifts, three different marked shifts from the existing system, right? So 3 to 6 years old, what is the shift? 0 to 3 year old, what is the shift? Even maternal health, now that will be more focused upon, and that is how you can talk about. Now, what do you write in the conclusion of such an answer? Now, you cannot say that now the world has become beautiful and now India will be developed as a result of this move. You cannot have that kind of a superficial conclusion here. So, what do you write? You basically have to write and talk about the fact that development in early childhood care or development in early childhood stage is very important to utilize or attain the potential that the individual can offer as a country. So you have talked about the individual, now talk about the country. Or as a society and as a country, India needs to utilize its human capital to its fullest possible form. Now, that is that is something which can be realized by emphasizing on ECC and ensure that universalization of ECC is achieved by 2030, which will help us even achieve the case of sustainable development goals. Like that, you can conclude the answer. Try writing this answer on your own and ensure that you do it in the stipulated time window of around 8 minutes. Okay. Now, next, coming on to the article which has been in news for the past couple of days very prominently. Now, that is the US, and in fact, led by the US president. US president announced that US is going to impose a tariff of 25% on Indian goods and also will impose a penalty on India for buying the Russian oil as well as basically buying the Russian arms or the Russian ammunitions. Now, the US President Donald Trump has used certain very harsh words as well, which can be termed as unbecoming of a diplomatic discourse or unbecoming of a head of state. So, Donald Trump has basically said that he doesn't care what happens to India as a consequence of that. And both Russian and Indian economies are dead economies, so they can do whatever they want for all that he cares. Use the term all that I care. And even has been referring to India as a tariff king for a long period of time. Now, please keep one thing in mind. As we speak, today morning, Donald Trump has announced a tariff of 35% on Canada. He has also announced a slew of tariffs on countries like Brazil, and various different countries are there in the order. Now, there have been various speculations, there have been various questions which have been asked that why all of a sudden this has been announced. Most of the informed economists and people who are informed about the developments in the matter, they are basically referring to the fact that something has happened in the past 10 to 15 days whereby the president is not pleased with the development of the trade negotiations. Mind you, all the while that this is happening, US and India are engaged in arriving at a bilateral trade agreement. A bilateral trade agreement whereby the aspect of India lowering its duties, what US calls as tariffs, we call them as duties. So, for example, the US goods which are coming to India, we impose a tariff. For example, when we talk about the vehicles, the cars, now Tesla has opened a showroom in Mumbai, but the Tesla cars, they are subjected to duties which are very close to around 100%. As a consequence, the goods become costlier. Now, this trade agreement negotiations have been carried out for almost a couple of months and more, and there have been frequent to and fro around it. August 1 was set as a deadline, but then there was this kind of expectation that mercurial or the madman theory, which is associated with Donald Trump, there's a lot of unpredictability associated regarding what he might take as a step or not. Today morning, as we speak, Marco Rubio has also issued a statement whereby he has said that India's dealings with Russia that has not gone down well with the US administration. The Indian administration and the Indian government on its part has been stead firm in saying that look, whether we deal with Russia or not, whether we deal with China or not, that cannot be held as a litmus test about how US will deal with us. Now, that is a matter of our sovereignty. Now, if we want And if it is in our national interest, we will deal with any country which is possible. Now think about it. US for the longest period of time has been supporter and a large arms supplier to our enemy country, that is Pakistan. And it has waved off sanctions against Pakistan. It has looked the other way while Pakistan proliferated the nuclear weapons, etc. But that was in the national interest of US. So why can't it be expected that India also take a similar stand when it comes to our own national interest? Mind you, when the Prime Minister's visit to US happened at that point of time, the expectation from the side of the Trump administration was that look, we are offering them the fifth generation fighter aircraft, the F-35 Lightning. The expectation was that India will lap up that offer and will immediately order around hundreds of these aircrafts. Indian government has not done so, owing to the US arms control and again the issue of sovereignty. That again has irked the Trump administration. What again did not go well with the Trump administration is the fact that post Operation Sindoor, while you had the Pakistani government, administration, armed forces, and the entire paraphernalia all talking about and paying homage to Donald Trump, even saying that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, India has largely been reluctant to admit any US role. Now, the Prime Minister's address to the Parliament, that is the day before yesterday, he clearly mentioned that there was no phone call between any foreign leader and the Indian head of state when it comes to Operation Sindoor. Now, this on the face of it straight away contradicts what Trump has been claiming for almost a past couple of months. He wants to be seen as a negotiator in chief, as a peacekeeper in chief. Many of the times you wonder whether the world should simply provide a Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump and get done with it. Because he always seeks that I have done this, so I need a Nobel Peace Prize. So there are going to be implications. But the question is that in the case of these implications, does that signal a larger relationship downslide? The answer is yes. In the previous administration, starting very slowly from the era of Bill Clinton onwards, there had been an upsurge in Indo US relations, be it the Indian prime ministers addressing the US Congress, or be it in the nuclear deal, or be it even in terms of the arms supply. But in the past couple of months and so on, you would observe that the relations have not developed to the expectation. There have been various different US allegations about India helping Russian economy to stay afloat. And despite the fact that Trump at one point of time was one of the biggest supporters of Vladimir Putin, he basically claimed in his electoral campaign that he can end the Russia Ukraine war within a week of coming to power. Now, the growing frustration with his inability to create any kind of lasting peace in the region basically means that US is trying to find a kind of a scapegoat. Now, at the same time, US has announced a kind of a mini trade deal with Pakistan. And the snide remark that Trump made on Truth Social that cannot be ignored. Trump said that we are having a wonderful deal with Pakistan regarding oil research and oil discovery. Maybe India, or they can sell this oil to India later on. In a way, putting all the weight of US diplomacy behind Pakistan and development of Pakistan. While this has raised certain panic buttons in our country, we have to understand that India's entire foreign policy has developed and has matured in an era of hostility from the US. But still, over a period of time, there has been a bureaucratization of the relationship where the relationship has transitioned from the goodwill between the leaders to basically each and every tier and the level of the government cooperating with each other. So the relationship is not immediately out of the window, but this is a kind of a pressure tactic that the Trump administration has employed time and time again to ensure that the next country or the country that he is facing, they bow down, they provide certain kind of flattery, and they agree to massive tariff cuts. Look at the trade deal done between the US and the EU. Now, EU was forced to agree to huge amount of investment that they will carry out in the US. Now, for US, This is positive because for US, this has meant that the current account balance that they were basically looking at and staring at the deficits earlier, now they are looking at some amount of surplus in the tune of $100 billion a quarter. Now, this large amount of money that is used and that is being used by the Trump administration to channelize into the tax breaks that he's providing to his constituency. So, for US's own domestic politics, this is absolutely fine. But for countries like India, there can be multiple sectors which can be impacted. And mind you, this follows an already announced statement by the US that US is going to charge large amount of tariffs on steel and copper exports. So when it comes to Indian industry, we need to and when it comes to Indian Commerce Ministry, so to say, we need to be steadfast, we need to be sure about our measures, and we need not bow down into the negotiations because that is what the Trump administration and particularly Donald Trump likes: a kind of flattery, a kind of obeisance, and a kind of laying down of arms. Now, when it comes to India, the apparel export to the US might slow down owing to increased tariffs, where countries like Vietnam, countries like Indonesia, which are basically at around 15% tariff rate of the US announcement, now they might end up gaining slightly. But the unpredictability of the US market has ensured that almost all the industry leaders across the world, they are looking for alternatives to the market. So while in the short term, the apparel sector might expect a kind of a slowdown, it will mean thinning out of the profit margin of the apparel sector and the merchants. But at the same time, the need of the hour is to find alternate markets. Also, one has to keep in mind that when it comes to the pharma sector, India is known as the pharmacy of the world. When it comes to generic medicines, when it comes to cheaper medicines, all of them are made in India. Now, if the US decides to impose heavy tariff on Indian pharma, that means what? Even the healthcare cost in the US is going to rise up. Availability of medicines in the US is going to decline, and that will directly impact the health sector and healthcare sector in the. But what about India? Will it impact India? Definitely yes. US forms around 20% of our export market. So obviously this is going to be impacted, and US is one of our largest trading partners out there. It is true that US has got a trade deficit with India. We have a trade surplus. And that is what is not flying well with the Trump administration. So when it comes to Indian pharmacy, where will it be impacted? It will be impacted in terms of the aspect, or rather its ability to generate profit. When you don't generate profit, your ability to research on the newer drugs, that will be limited, and their ability to come out with newer medicines. So R&D, newer medicines, all of them impacted. Okay? So that is basically the case of the entire aspect of soured relations. Now, after this, when we come to the next article. The next article is the new, that is the Nisar satellite. Nisar satellite, which was co-developed and launched basically by ISRO and co-developed by ISRO and NASA. Now, we have discussed a couple of days back about the useful or utility of this Nisar satellite, how it will help in increasing the fight against the climate change, providing a particular shape and strategic direction to it, and also the benefit associated and the unique. Now, this article is largely associated with the same discussion. Now, what you see in the image here is basically the depiction of the satellite in it. You see, this is the satellite, which is zoomed in. So it has basically got two bands, right? You have the L band and you have the S band. L band. Now, L band is made by NASA and S band radar is made by ISRO. So it marks a first in many cases for ISRO's own developmental program as well, whereby ISRO is for the first time able to, in a way, deploy such complex maneuvers in space. Observe that once the satellite is launched, after that, it will basically launch a boom on which the radar antenna reflector will be fixed. So it will be a very complicated maneuver. Now, when we talk about the satellite in itself, it is a 2.8-ton Earth observation satellite, so to say. It is in the sun synchronous orbit. So, in a 12-day span, that is from dawn to dusk, it will monitor the same region every 12 days. So, any change when it comes to vegetation, any change when it comes to the ice caps, any change when it comes to agricultural land, that can be measured with greater precision. And that allows for greater ability to predict certain disasters like glacial lakes outburst flood, avalanches, landslides, etc. As a consequence, our disaster handling capability is also going to improve substantially. Now, it is a combination of NASA built L band with the ISRO built S band radar system and can detect surface changes to the tune of even few centimeters. Revisits the same location every 12 days. And it will support studies on glacial flow, biomass, sea ice, land use, and even urban subsidence. Now, the significance, as I told you, for climate change, for disaster resilience, that is there, that is proof. But there are certain challenges which have been indicated. What are the challenges? When we talk about the development of this satellite, particularly the communication system associated, now for that, ISRO did not have that capability. It was dependent on NASA's expertise, and in many of the systems, the entire the installation, simulation, and even final verification and inspection that was restricted only to NASA. ISRO had no say. Why? Because we do not have the technological prowess. Now, that means in order to ensure that future collaborations do happen, in order to ensure that India remains a partner, an attractive partner for space exploration, we need to up our own game and we need to carry out greater research. Even when it comes to downloading of data link, the KA link, so to say, the KA band link as it is referred to, there also we have our limitation. The amount of data which will be sent by this satellite will be huge and humongous. And we have our limited ability in order to handle such amount of data link. So that is again a limitation. So what are the challenges? Lack of expertise, technological foundations, and overtly dependent still on foreign in many of the complex technology. And what is the way forward? Way forward has to be a kind of integration of the ground systems with the space technology at a faster pace and greater speed and greater ability to download data or greater ability of the ground stations. That is one of the way forward. The ground stations basically mean those larger stations on the ground which receive that link from the satellite, and then we interpret that data in order to understand what is the meaning of it. Then faster cloud integration so that the data can be interpreted, integration, faster interpretation of the data for end user. For example, even if military is using that information, that availability of data should be faster. Faster imaging availability, right? Then more such collaborations so that we have more learning exercise with foreign partners like the European Space Agency and so on. Then we also need to focus on research and development. So these are some of the way forward which can be focused upon. Okay. Now, after this, moving on to the next article. Now, this article relevant for your GS paper 3, if you take a look at it, can the ICJ ruling force the rich nations to pay for historical emissions? What is this? So this article that you see, it is in a form of a Q&A where you have an American environmental thinker and the UN Special Representative on Health, both of them have been asked certain. Let us ignore this Q&A format and let us understand what is the gist of it. So on 23rd of July, the International Court of Justice issued a landmark advisory observation or opinion clarifying each of the nations and the states' legal obligations and responsibilities regarding climate change. But this ruling is not binding on the nations. It is just an observation. Now you see, what is the entire concept of climate justice? What do we mean by the term climate justice? Climate justice refers to the fact that today, yes, there is lot of emission, greenhouse gases, which is exaggerating the problem of climate change. But all these greenhouse gas emission, ozone hole depletion, has that primarily been done by countries like India and China? The answer is no. These have been done traditionally by developed countries. And when we say developed countries, we mean countries like the US, countries like the UK, European countries, Australia, and so on. Now, they have developed throughout the 1800s and the 1900s, a good part of 1900s, owing to large amount of carbon emission. So those are your historic emissions. So, as a consequence, when the fight against climate change is basically fought and when the strategy is woven, at that point of time, these developed countries have a slightly greater responsibility where they should provide the underdeveloped and developing nations with financial and technical assistance to fight against climate change. So that is what is also referred to as the climate justice or the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. In almost all the climate negotiations, this is a key principle which is featured. Starting with, if you talk about not even the climate negotiation, but if you talk about the ozone hole depletion, you had the Montreal Protocol. Now, Montreal Protocol in 1987 talked about the CBDR, that developed countries need to phase out ozone depleting substances first, and then the developing countries can do so, right? Then, even when we talk about the Kyoto Protocol, which was arrived at almost 10 years later, that is 1997. This was against the greenhouse gases. There also, a greater responsibility was affixed and targets were given to the developed nations of the world, not the developing nations. Then, after that, even when we talk about the Paris Agreement, now, as per the Paris Agreement, you basically had the developed nations responsible for providing financial and technological assistance to the developing nations. Then, eventually, as later developments of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, you basically had the L&D fund, loss and damage fund. This loss and damage fund was declared as an outcome of Conference of Party number 28 to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was basically about the countries like Pakistan, India, all of them suffering the wrath of climate change. Now, we don't have enough money. So the developed nations who have caused this climate change, they should help us, especially when it comes to small island nations. The small island nations in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, they are on the verge of drowning out. Now, the International Court of Justice, in its observations, has made certain headway and certain remarks which can help attain the climate justice. How? So basically, here it has declared climate change caused unequivocally by human activities, which impacts the human ecosystems and the human legal duty to prevent the harm. So all the nations, they have a legal duty, a legitimate duty in order to prevent that climate harm from happening and prevent the warming from increasing beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial era. The states will be held accountable if they are able to cause and if there is a legitimate linkage that this state's emission or this country's emission has led to an increase in temperature, then the states can be held accountable. There can be reparations which can be sought. Now, here, the court upheld that historically high emitting or the states, right, the wealthier states, they have to support the poorer nations. And even the reparations, as we have discussed, if a clear cut linkage is established, then the wealthier nation has to provide some amount of financial reparation or financial compensation. Protection of small island nations. Even if a small island nation is partially drowned or partially submerged, still it is going to consider the submerged part as its own territory. So the portion that has been submerged, for that it can seek account. Now, these are some damning rulings and observations. What will be the implication? Can it be the case that now, after this ICJ ruling, anything will change in global climate governance? Answer is no. Why? Because it is not non-binding on the states. Secondly, when we talk about these rulings, now there is an aspect that you have to prove the linkage. Can the linkage be established that India's emissions have led to the rise in temperature? India will say no, China's emissions have led to that. China will say no, Russia's emissions have led to that. So, impossible in a way to establish relation or link. Establish a linkage. Then, when let's suppose you have established a linkage as well, will the developed countries, even after establishing linkage, give you money? The answer is no. Take a look at US. US has been withdrawing, participating, again withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. US, in a way, has been subsidizing fossil fuel right now. The Trump administration is going big on the internal combustion engines. Joe Biden, for that matter, to give him credit, tried to ensure that there will be in the future the phase out of internal combustion engines. But then that was politically costly for him. Now, Trump is ensuring that he is all for the fossil fuel emissions. So that is where US can straight away ignore these warnings. And if US does not follow the suit, all the other developed countries will always find an excuse that despite the ICJ orders, we will not follow. After all, just take a look at the global governance, the state of global governance. There have been resolutions in the case of Gaza. There have been resolutions in the Security Council for humanitarian aid, etc. Is the US following it? No. Is Germany following it? No. So, even despite these orders issued, the lack of compliance by developed nations is going to persist. Lack of compliance. So, is there any positive? The answer is yes. When we talk about climate negotiations, in that the small island nations will get a foothold in the climate negotiation. When it comes to declaring the nationally determined contributions as per the Paris Agreement, there again, there will be some amount of accountability. The domestic courts, they can also seek some accountability. Particularly in the European nations, they can also seek some accountability. Okay, so that is the case of the particular ruling of J. Practice question. The recent advisory opinion by the ICJ holding the developed countries accountable is a landmark in achieving climate justice. Comment. Now, what do you do in the intro of this question? In the intro, you talk about the background or the context. That what were the observations? The International Court of Justice, basically, in the advisory observation or the advisory ruling, which is not binding, has affixed some accountability on the developed nation. So very briefly, then explain that in the body. Explain. the various points that we have talked about in the case of small island nations, in the case of reparations, and so on. Then eventually talk about both positives as well as negatives. Positives and negatives, right? The implications. That is how you can write the answer. Okay. Now coming on to another article, why the world needs better green technology. Now, when we talk about the green technology, green means in a way renewable, in a way non polluting. So, the world largely relies on the silicon wafer based photovoltaic cell or the solar cell for generation of electricity. Now, these solar cells, they have been developed way back in 1954 by Bell Laboratories in US. That is where they developed these silicon wafers. Now, having said that, so obviously it is an old technology. The efficiency of these solar panels, so to say, the efficiency is low. Now, efficiency is still very low. Why? The technological development has not happened to the same extent, and the limitation of the silicon wafer as well. Now, this efficiency is largely in the range of 15 to 18%. That is how much they are able to generate. At the same time, there are other issues associated such as large land area is required. Now, in the case, where do you get that large land area? In the era where we are facing large population pressure, at the same time, pressure to maintain that green environment, ensuring large available land area for solar power plants, etc., that is a luxury that many countries cannot afford. Also, lack of technological development has meant that the most available technology is still least efficient. There have been various different materials like gallium. Now, gallium has been used in certain solar panels where it has indicated that the efficiency can be as high as 74%. So, we have to incorporate this newer technology. The article argues that look, solar technology has provided us with benefits. When it comes to solar tech, it has played a constructive role in ensuring that the emissions in certain areas go down. But the reality of the fact is also the same, that it is costly and it is China controlled, which is a major problem in today's day and age. So we need to ensure that there are newer research areas which are carried out. Now, one of the emerging green technologies has been green hydrogen, which has been talked about. Now, what is green hydrogen? So, hydrogen as a fuel is used. So, what do? So, you basically take water, you provide electricity, isn't it? Electricity to water, and as a consequence, you basically have H2 plus O. Now, that is how you produce hydrogen fuel. Now, this electricity has to come from renewables. Only then will it be classified as the green hydrogen. Now, renewables mostly mean solar power plants and so on. Now, the problem that we face that in the present day and age, green hydrogen, the cost which is involved in producing green hydrogen is substantially higher as compared to what you gain as an output. Because the cost of electricity is still very high when it is generated from the solar power plants. Also, once you generate that hydrogen, the transportation is very costly because you need specialized containers to store hydrogen at low temperature. Utilization is also costly. You need special engines to be made. So it is a costly endeavor. So that is why green methanol, green ammonia, these are the avenues which are being explored. The need of the hour is to not only ensure that the power plants and the solar panels become cheaper, but also you have other sources of energy, other avenues of energy, which are non-biological and are completely new, something that European Union is working upon. Countries like India also need to work upon that, rather than straight away focusing only on the aspect of solar and green hydrogen. We need to reimagine what renewable energy can be and what green energy can be. Then will we be able to transition from the present mix of energy that we are facing to a cleaner and much more secure climate friendly future. So that is what the article. Okay. Now, the alternatives. So alternatives, basically, you have green methanol. Now, the benefit with green methanol and green ammonia is the fact that production is not that costly, and also transportation is easier, can be transported at normal temperatures as well as compared to hydrogen. So that is why it is much more utilizable. But we need to find newer alternative. Okay. Now, after this, we come to certain articles relevant for your prelims. Starting with the Advanced Guided Missile Frigate delivered to the Navy. Now, frigates basically are your naval warships, which are smaller than the destroyers. Right, so you have the aircraft carriers, which are the largest. After that, you have the destroyers, which can carry multiple cruise missiles, in certain cases even ballistic missiles. And for example, in India, we have the K4 systems, right? So like that, K15 systems, all of that. Now, then after that, you have the class of corvettes and frigates. So frigates are lighter vessels, but frigates allow you to operate much closer to the enemy territory, owing to its ability to maneuver even in shallower waters as compared to the destroyers. Now, India has been commissioning frigates quite frequently in the recent times, which is an indicator of our coming of age of our naval technology. In that endeavor, one of the naval frigates which has been commissioned is basically the INS Himgiri. INS Himgiri has been manufactured by the GRSE Kolkata. Now, it will be able to have Barak 8 missiles as well, which provide a kind of an air defense. At the same time, will be able to have some cruise missiles. Mind you, when you had the Operation Sindoor, the standoff which happened with Pakistan, or the skirmish which happened with Pakistan, at that point of time, everybody talked about the air defense. Now, that air defense and that air resilience and the radar system, that was also supported by the naval frigates right in the Arabian Sea. So that is where Navy has also got a substantial role to play when it comes to the defense of regions such as Mumbai and the areas of the coastal metropolitan regions of our country. So in that, INS Himgiri is a step in the right direction. So it belongs to the Project 17A. Project 17. Okay. Now, a station in Ladakh begins research to simulate life on Mars. So, a Bangalore based startup named Protoplanet is a startup, Bangalore based startup. Now, what it has done, it has established a kind of a simulation station, so to say, in the region of Sokar, around Sokar Lake in Ladakh, right? Ladakh. The station is named as Hope, Human Outer Planet Exploration. Explore Hope. Okay. Now, this is basically to simulate the conditions which would be prevalent in Mars. Now, various different astronauts, etc., they will be undergoing simulation exercise in order to ensure that they are able to understand the conditions even on Moon, even on Mars, which is very vital for India's space ambitions. Now, the conditions in Ladakh are very akin to a kind of a desertified environment that you find in other regions as well. And there will be simulated uh, the vacuum chambers, etc., which will also be created. It will also be for the psychological training of the astronauts, because the psychological aspect is one of the strongest parts or the strongest obstacles that the astronomers face when they move beyond the surface of the planet Earth. So that is where the Hope Station by Protoplanet, which is a startup set up around Sokar in Ladakh, is meant to simulate the life outside planet. Now, coming to the last article of the day, that is global power grid expansion fuels copper demand surge. Now, across the world, there has been an increased attention paid to revamping of electrical infrastructure and technologies thereby. So, associated with grid revamping, the revamping of the wires, connections, and more electrical supply is required. Now, whenever this is done, you need more wiring, etc. And copper is one of those elements which are in great demand. But the problem is that the supply of copper is scarce in the world. You also have to understand that in the race of emerging technologies, even when it comes to electric vehicles, there also the requirement of copper is very high. As a consequence, countries like China, they have ensured that maximum refining of copper happens in their own territory. So that is why there's a supply chain bottleneck. The price of copper is expected to increase by a whopping 23% by 2030. Meaning, various countries which are import dependent, we in India, we are also import dependent for copper. So we are going to face problems. Now, amongst the major producers across the world, you basically have the Republic of Congo, you have Chile, right? You have Peru. These are some of the larger producers out there. But the most major refiner, see, elemental copper, you cannot simply take elemental copper and weave it into a wire. You need refining process. But the major refining, all of that is directed a bottleneck, and that is China. And that is what controls the supply. So that is at risk. Now, for your prelims, what you need to be aware is the aspect of the utilization of copper. So when we talk about utilization of copper, 32% maximum utilization is in equipment manufacturing. That is even going to involve electrical equipment, building construction, 26%, 17% for infrastructure, and so on. Now, in India, we have been using copper for a long period of time. Even when we talk about the bronze tools during the Bronze Age, etc., which was used in India, the copper which was used there, it is estimated that the copper was taken, the alchemists have predicted and estimated that the coppers could have been taken either from the Khetri mines in Rajasthan or from the Hazaribagh mines in the Chota Nagpur plateau. In India, these are some of the major copper producing centers, right? These are Singhbhum copper deposit, that is the region around the Hazaribagh and the Chota Nagpur plateau. Then you have in the region of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and some parts of Karnataka, but majorly Rajasthan. So that is the copper deposit situation in India. Mind you, for your mains examination this year, copper is very relevant. That is why you can refer to my Telegram group, where we have basically provided a detailed document about the problems in the copper industry, the supply in the world, and the implications of India for the development of mains perspective. That is what brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was holistic and comprehensive and has added the information that you see. If you like the discussion and the content provided, put that in the comment section below. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and subscribe the channel if you have not already done so. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.